welcome to A Plus News. I am thrilled to have Troy Williams, the new CEO of the NFF, with us today. Welcome, Troy.
Great to be with you.
Excellent. Now, congratulations on your new role. It's definitely been a baptism of fire for you. Lots on. We're 10 weeks in. How's it been?
It's 10 weeks into the role. It seems like the 10th month, and by the time we get to the 10th month, I'm sure it'll seem like the 10th year. The one thing I've learned very quickly is that whatever my diary looks like at 6 in the morning, it's completely changed by about 11 o'clock. And that's to be expected by the diverse nature of the role. Whether it's our dealings with the federal government, helping our members deal with states and territory governments, and quite frankly, a range of issues from gun control to land use right through to floods, fire, pestilence, all of which have hit my desk in the last month. It's been a pretty dynamic 10 weeks.
Excellent, and it sounds like your diary, your day-to-day diary looks very much like a farmer's one too. That you never know what's coming at you.
Not quite with the super early starts, but otherwise pretty close.
Fantastic. Well, let's just start talking a little bit about your background. Can you tell us, about your background and how you ended up in this role?
Great question. I've spent most of my times working as a link between industry and government and, quite frankly, small businesses, helping create an environment where they can grow, operate sustainably, and quite frankly, where government gets off their back. Governments always try to help business. I say always. Sometimes you have to do that. Maybe that's pretty qualified sometimes. But by and large, they try to help government. But their solution always seems to be more regulation or making life harder. And so I spent a lot of times in the medical technology sector, in the education sector, the building construction sector, quite frankly, getting government out of the way. And how that's played out is making sure that NFF, with the great support of our members, champions a set of policy priorities that let farmers farm, allow them to best they can be, to get their crops in the ground, to look after the animals that they're getting to market without government in their back. Now, government plays a legitimate role, but quite frankly, they're in too many paddocks and they're in too many back pockets at the moment.
Excellent. And so this role, did you find it? Did it find you? How did that all happen?
Combination of both. You get one of those weird phone calls and at the end of a fairly considered process and a lengthy process, here I am. The board deliberately chose, in my case, someone from outside the sector. We've got a lot of family farms, but I can't pretend to have done anything except a lot of fencing and shooting on them. What they wanted was someone to understand stakeholder dynamics, how we can best support our member organisations, of which there's 43, and the sector, how we can strengthen NFF's role in the political debate, making sure that we're at all the tables. There's an old saying in politics, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so NFF went through a strong field of candidates and got me. As I said, it was a case of having someone who's got the policy advocacy skills to make sure that a government that we're going to have some challenge with over the next 3 years is listening, that it acts, but more importantly, we're bringing other stakeholders along on the sector. But probably the key to all of this is making sure that we're true to ourselves and we're driven by our members. So it's not a case of Troy and the policy team figuring out what we do today or what we do next week. That's genuinely driven by the advice we get from the state farming organisations and generally driven by the members in the commodity councils.
Excellent. That's a big job, bringing all those people together and getting some consensus. And fantastic.
If we get consensus, we're in a really good space. I'm happy if we get outcomes for our members, no matter how they do. If we can get them through the parliament with a single vote majority, or we get them through a committee with a single vote majority, if that's what delivers for farmers, that's great. Consensus is better, but if we have to use different mechanisms, well, we'll do what's required to get the outcomes that members need.
Excellent. And just coming back to these massive sort of first 10 weeks in this role, what are your highlights in that time?
Look, to be honest, the most enjoyable and most productive parts of the time are actually not when I'm in the office, not when I'm in Canberra. Whether we're up with the cattle sector in Darwin not so long ago, down in Launceston with AgFest. It brings home a lot of what we do. We talk through some fairly complex policy issues here, and the team in Canberra are great. We talk them through with our members, but it's actually understanding what they mean on the land. We've done a lot of work on the palm program, and in a prior life, we did a lot of work on the palm program, bringing in Pacific Island workers in the Northern Territory. So to come across a berry grower down in Tasmania who has about 350 palm workers, understanding how the complexities of the palm scheme is hindering her farm, hindering her ability to get the workforce she needs, that's really what's the highlight of the job.
Excellent. And this week we've had the Ministry of the new government sworn in, so Julie Collins has retained her position as Ag Minister. How is the NFF relationship with Minister Collins?
No real surprise. We know the Minister quite well. In the reshuffle, the Minister lost the small business portfolio, and on balance, that's actually probably a positive for Ag. It allows her to have a stronger focus. There are areas where we're going to really struggle with the federal government, but there are areas where there's a lot of common agreement, and an excellent case is the food security strategy. I was with the Minister when she announced it just prior to the election. We can work on them. There are going to be some lines in the sand where we just have real challenges with the government, whether it's water use, whether that goes to land use with either environmental overlay or Indigenous overlay. We're going to have some fairly tough discussions with the government, made more complex by the fact that the opposition's diminished. Quite often we would brief the opposition and they're in a really strong position to support the ag sector. Now we'll continue to have those discussions. I was talking to Susan Lee's office only this week to align some of our diaries so we can support the opposition. But when it comes to the government, we maintain a respectful set of discussions with them at both the department and parliamentary level. There's a lot of commonality, but there are also some areas where we're going to have some challenges over the next 3 years.
What's that one key issue that you're wanting to push with the federal government at the moment, a key message you're trying to get through?
Farmers, by and large, are small businesses, and this isn't understood. They have a lot of pressures that you see of any owner on the corner store. There's a misconception, many in the parliament, that farmers are almost landed gentry. This seems to be a misconception that we're working against. For a lot of people in the parliament, their real only exposure to agriculture is the farmers market on the Coles on a local Sunday. We're working to fix that. So what we need to do is have the discussions. And you'll see this sort of subtle shifts in NFF's advocacy to bring farmers into our submissions. We can talk about them in a macro sense. We can talk about the economic impact. We can talk about changes to the workforce. What we need is to highlight through cameos and op-eds and things like that what the actual implications are for farmers. Because quite frankly, there's too many people in the parliament. They've got a soft spot for farming, but they really don't understand it.
So that's a really interesting point that you made that I'd love to flesh out with you further. And as you mentioned, op-eds, and just then it's really a key message that doesn't seem to get across very well. It hasn't been put across well in the past. So yeah, would absolutely love to do some more work with you on that.
Yeah.
But let's touch on just some of the other key issues at the moment. So I am based down here in Victoria in the south. So drought is the key issue sort of that a lot of people are facing. What are you advocating for in that space at the moment?
That's a really good one. So droughts, as you can imagine, has been front of mind, not just in Victoria, but also in South Australia. What we've been doing is working with our counterpart organisations, the Victorian Farmers Federation, primary producers in South Australia, to make sure farmers get the support they need. On these issues, we take the lead from our members to make sure that the state governments are stepping up, and the South Australian government has been very good. The Victorian government, I know, has got some work in the pipeline to support farmers. What we do is make sure that the federal architecture is there. So whether it's through RIC, they've got access to the loans, whether it's through the other Commonwealth support, that's there on a timely basis. What we don't want is a farmer who needs the support now having to spend months filling out paperwork simply to get whether it's low interest loans or other types of financial support. So our role is to really monitor the work of the Commonwealth, make sure that the politicians and the departmental officials have visibility of the real pain that farmers are going through, and it is awful, and not likely to get much better over the medium term if we look at those with expertise in weather forecasting. So our real focus is on making sure the federal government's is aware of the issues, and look, they are, certainly at a departmental level, that at a political level they are, but also making sure that our members, whether it's the VFF, PPSA, have the support they need to support farmers, not just in terms of keeping their farms going, but in areas such as mental health. Farming's a pretty tough gig anyway, made much, much worse if you're facing a prolonged drought. So we want to make sure, as I said, beyond all the practical support for farmers, there's some of that other really critical support, such as mental health support, to get them through this tough period.
Is there any sort of one thing you would like the government to do to help farmers experiencing drought at the moment? Any sort of one key thing?
Get out and talk to them. I don't want politicians' first-hand experience of drought being on a submission. The local members who represent the areas are pretty good, but I want to make sure, and we've written to the Prime Minister, and I've got to follow this conversation up with his team in the next day or two, to make sure that those who responsible for policy, our political leaders, actually have a first-hand experience of what the farmers are. From that, good things will flow in terms of support. But as I said, if a politician's only real experience of drought, understanding what the impacts are as a government report, we have a long way to go. And so I said, we've invited the Prime Minister, told him he needs to get out to increasingly New South Wales is becoming concerned, but certainly to Victoria, certainly to South Australia, And not just the Prime Minister, but certainly the Ag Minister, the Treasurer as well. There's about 15 key ministers and assistant ministers that we deal with across the Commonwealth. We want to make sure that their first-hand understanding of drought is actually getting out talking to farmers. Farmers are far more effective at explaining their problems than I'd ever be.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we also, staying with drought just for the moment, the RIC loans, I understand they are not necessarily fit for purpose anymore with the limitations that are on them. That asset level is not really fit for purpose anymore.
You get down to those level of weeds, so that was a discussion I was part of only earlier this week, is making sure that the RIC loans do their intended job. And so this is a sort of an ongoing piece of work, just looking at how they play out in the current environment and making sure they deliver the support they require, or whether other supports of RIC loans are required. So we get varied advice on the RIC loans. We also look at it in a global context. They may not be brilliant, but they're actually pretty good at global context. Now that's of no use whatsoever to a farmer who's struggling. So we do have a watching brief to make sure those loans get the support they need when they need it. And if they're not the best vehicle, what other types of support are available? So that's a lot of our work, and that's an ongoing discussion we have with the Australian government. That's an ongoing discussion we have with our members.
And moving on to sort of international market access now, that's been some interesting times with President Trump in the US and implications particularly for the beef and lamb markets, which are our key readers. Have you been doing any work in that space as well?
It's probably easy to pick a time when that hasn't been an active discussion item for NFF, not just in the current context, but over a number of years. Quite frankly, the Trade Minister, Don Farrell, we were dealing with prior to the election, had been very good, and the department has been excellent, not just in terms of managing the process, but also in pushing back against some areas where the US might have wanted to look around it, and biosecurity measures were a key one. The Australian government was very, very strong and said that's just not something that's on the table. We continue to liaise with the department. Post the election environment, we'll continue to liaise at the department level. We also have a fairly robust discussion, ongoing discussion with the US Embassy over in DC. There's a number of key stakeholders we get together with the Ambassador, Kevin Rudd, on a fairly frequent basis to bridge that gap. So this has been an active piece of work. The 10% tariff is not helpful. It could have been far worse. But first and foremost, NFF is a proponent for free trade. It's done a really solid job of lifting up the sector, of opening up new exports, not just to the US, but across Southeast Asia and particularly China. So first and foremost, we're helping the sector navigate the short-term challenges by whatever's popped into Donald Trump said this week, but we're also working to basically restore normalcy. Farmers need to have confidence that products were welcome in America today will be welcome again in 6 months' time, in 2 years' time, that they won't have tariffs. And we also need the US administration to understand our biosecurity measures exist for very good reasons. They're not some sort of artificial construct to stop American products coming here. The simple fact is, if American products can meet our standards, there's no real inhibition on them coming here. So we need to make sure that they understand that it isn't some sort of artificial barrier. There are very good reasons to do it, to protect the quality of Australian produce. And so that's been a major part of our work. And look, a real shout out to Chris Young and the team here who've dealt with that, and also the support we've had from our members in navigating that in what's a pretty dynamic environment. If we have 3 days where trade policy is the same, we breathe a sigh of relief in the current environment.
Absolutely. And do you have relationships with, say, the American farming organisations as well, national organisations? And
with Zippy, Deval and others over in the US, we do. And in some areas where trade policy, there's going to be some natural tensions. In others, there's really solid arrangements. So we do, not just, of course, in the US. I was talking to my counterpart Terry over in New Zealand only earlier this week. So we have ongoing relationships. And on some areas where trade, there's a natural competitive tension. But the thing is too, is where the advice that we've received from our US counterparts has been helpful. If we look at US trade, they just can't, import substitution is just not an option. If beef exports from Australia to the US were to be halted overnight, the US simply cannot fill that market. And so that's where some of the very much behind the scenes conversations with our US counterparts and with others have been really quite helpful.
And let's talk a little bit about food security too. So heading into the election, this was a big topic. What you have commitments from the government to put together a food security plan. What are you expecting to actually, I suppose, achieve with that? And have you got a timeline on when that will all be happening?
So this is a discussion that we'll be having with the Minister in the coming weeks. The commitment just prior to the election was $3.5 million to develop a strategy. Recognising food security is both a domestic and global concern. But we've also understood that it's critically important to Australia. It's part of having quite frankly, a healthy, stable society. It's also important for the sector. What we're looking for is a document that recognises the need to invest in local farm systems, regional supply chains, and even reducing food waste. These are all critical priorities, including some big picture ones. Fuel security is something we need to factor into that. Biosecurity is another one. The fact that over the last 6 months we've been talking about egg shortages and chicken white meat shortages is not something that you would think in the normal course of events that we'd be talking about. And so what we need to do is the strategy to look at it in its totality in terms of events that we don't know when they're going to come, but we can predict them. Droughts, floods, fires. We don't know when they're going to come, but they are, to use a Donald Rumsfeld expression, they are known unknowns. But we also need to make sure that the strategy can deal with some of the broader issues, whether it's a trade war, which we hadn't considered, whether it's an unfortunate escalation of military tensions in the South China Sea. We need to make sure that the food security strategy deals with these issues. And then what we need to do is make sure that it filters through to practical assistance on the farmer. So we can talk about these big picture geopolitical overlays, large weather events. We need to make sure that the food security strategy has really practical outcomes which, in its most simple sense, keep farmers farming.
Excellent. And we've touched on mental health, but I'd love to discuss farm safety in general and keeping our farmers and their families and their employees, everyone safe. There was some funding announced for this as well through the election, I believe. Will the NFF be helping sort of work out where that funding will be spent as well? Will be part of that consultation?
So it's $2.5 million for FarmSafe, of which NFF is a key partner, and this will provide some medium-term surety over the funding there. So Stevie, the FarmSafe's General Manager, and I meet 2-3 times a week. Quite frankly, an integral part of the NFF team, although FarmSafe is a separate entity, and that probably gives you an idea of the importance of this. They've got a really good campaign underway talking about near misses. So what it does is take sort of the broader abstract discussions around farm safety that we can all understand to have a serious discussion about those of us who are still here or avoided a major miss. And I know, as I was saying before, I've done way too much farm fencing in my life, and I look at some of the near misses there. We need to highlight those incidents, how they came about, and how corrective measures can be taken. And quite frankly, if it wasn't for a rather strong set of eye protection, I would have had a very long couple of days in a hospital. We need to raise those sort of things. So FarmSafe, with the $2.5 million that the Commonwealth Government has committed to, is now in a position to raise that discussion. There's also, as you've suggested, Natasha, some really important work around mental health. No one should lose their life for doing their job. No one should take their life. And if we've got people who are... We need to make sure that those issues are understood and their friends, their family, the sector's in a position to undertake them. There's a coalition that NFF brought together, around 50 stakeholders across the sector, to raise awareness of the issue, to seek funding commitments from the Australian Government to better support mental health, and that's going to be a major priority of ours going forward.
And these have just been a couple of issues that I've sort of cherry-picked to highlight with you today. But is there anything else that you've really found to stand out over the last 10 weeks you'd like to mention? Anything you're really passionate about working on?
Quite frankly, is just the resilience of the sector. I think I was week 2 in the job, and we were dealing with a cyclone which created some fairly adverse weather events in southeast Queensland, northern New South Wales. Only early this week I was talking with the dairy sector in northern New South Wales, who just seem to be, not being flippant here, but almost permanently underwater, or really soggy paddocks, and what that's doing to them. So the sector's resilience, what we want to do is make sure that to the extent that's possible, the federal government supports it. We're not looking for welfare, we're just looking for practical support, but also too is that how we better leverage the advice of our members. So there's a major piece of reform underway. We've got our NFF Members Council next week. We'll be working our way through it, how we strengthen our governance arrangements, how we strengthen our member engagement to better support our members to support the sector. But looking in terms of reflections, it really is the resilience of the sector. As I said, we're dealing with farmers who've got really quite severe drought conditions in Victoria, South Australia. I'm increasingly concerned about western and southwestern New South Wales. We've got in northern New South Wales, in southeast Queensland, in fact southwest Queensland too, really severe flooding events, although they're mitigating. The farmers there have done a good job. We've touched on it, make sure that the RIC loans are supportive, the other Commonwealth Government measures are supportive, and quite frankly, as as I opened, is that we can get rid of as much red tape on the sector. We want farmers farming. We don't want them filling in silly government forms. So with the advice of our members, with the advice of the sector more broadly, that'll continue to be a major focus, particularly over the next 3 years as the re-elected government settles in.
Excellent. Now, Troy, you are 10 weeks in, so I'm very premature in asking this question, but I thought it would be nice to finish just by asking, when your time in this role does come to an end, how do you want to be remembered? How are you going to measure success in this role? What are you aiming to do?
Two issues is that an organisation that had a fully engaged membership, where every member, our members of course aren't farmers, they're other farming organisations, where every member was able to make a positive contribution. And the other one too is, I said, really is allow farmers to keep farming, get government off their back. There's a legitimate role for government, but as I said, right now I think it'd be fair to say the government's in too many paddocks, it's in too many farmers' back pockets. We need to bring that to an end. So the two elements of that question, one is that an organisation is fully connected with our members, and the other's where the role of government's understood, and quite frankly, if you've got a farmer doing the right thing, you've got a farmer operating sustainably, government gets the hell out of their way.
Excellent. Now, while we're talking about the member organisations, where is the NFF with all its member organisations at the moment? I believe New South Wales and Victoria have both sent in letters of intent to pull out of the NFF. Are they still active?
They're still very active. I'm surprised if we take New South Wales, the level of engagement between, I shouldn't say surprised, I'm genuinely admired the level of engagement between our staff and New South Wales farmer staff. The contribution we get for New South Wales farmers across our committees is excellent. Victoria is in a really good space in terms of our engagement. So like any family, there's going to be some squabbles. But what I can tell you is the NFF board is fully committed to working with their members to make sure that they get what is appropriate out of the association. So only earlier in the week, you probably picked up, I was in South East Queensland, had a really good meeting with Queensland Farmers Federation and what they need. So yeah, look, there are some issues to go around. I think it's played out in some of the ag media that things are broken, they're not fit for purpose. I've yet to find, other than perhaps one or two key stakeholders, hold that view. The overwhelming levels of support are really good. What we're doing, Members Council, and a series of reforms that the members will devise, bring to a conclusion around September, October, is really to strengthen that work. At the end of the day, the farming sector is stronger when it's united. And so while there's always an opportunity for NFF to improve its things, we need to make sure that the focus isn't on our state farming organisations, the commodity councils or NFF. The focus is on farmers. So that's where we're working towards. The Chair, President DJ and I had a good discussion with a couple of our members on how we can do that literally only an hour ago. So our focus here at NFF is making sure that we can be, as an organisation, the best that we can be, that we can engage the members. There's going to be different views across the membership how that works. The board's up for that discussion, it wants it to be, but we need to make sure that our focus is not on our internal dynamics, but really on the farmers. And so for those who are dedicating far too much time at navel gazing, our suggestion is they stop looking at their navels and have a look out in the paddocks and have a discussion with farmers, because that's where the strength of the sector is, and that's where our focus needs to be.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Troy. Thank you for joining A+ News, and we hope to have more chats with you
No
in the
problem,
future.
mate. Great to be with you.
Thank you.